Hi, welcome to Middle East with Naska. My guest today is former Afghan Ambassador Omar Samad. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good morning, Naska.
Before we go to politics and Afghanistan politics, tell us about your story.
Well, my story is a very long one. Most of it is tied to Afghanistan. I had to leave the country under pressure when the communists took over in 1979, and then I ended up in Europe for a while, then the United States as a political refugee. And ever since then, I've been in some ways involved with Afghanistan issues. First as a student, then set up an organization called the African Youth Council in America. And later, through my studies in communications and international relations, I started getting into the media field. In the 1990s, I set up a media center, information center in the US called Afghanistan Information Center, which also involved and included a radio broadcast to Afghan communities across the US, and also a website back then, which was very rare back then. And after 9/11, I decided to go back to Afghanistan as one of the first Afghans to do so, and joined the new government in the foreign ministry as a spokesperson. Then 3 years later, I was asked to go as Afghan ambassador to Canada, where I stayed for almost 4.5 years, a very busy time in Afghan-Canadian relations, as Afghanistan was a very important Canadian foreign and security policy issue. Then I was asked to go as Afghan ambassador to France, where I spent about 2.5 years or so. And then I resigned because I was not very happy with the way the government was handling its job overall back in 2011. And I came back to the United States and joined a couple of think tanks and did some think tank work before being asked again to go back to Afghanistan after the 2014 elections that were very inconclusive and complex in nature. At that point, I was working as a senior strategy and policy advisor to the new chief executive, Dr. Abdullah. And the last appointment I was given was as ambassador to Belgium, with the EU and NATO also as part of the portfolio. But for a variety of reasons, I did not take up my post in 2016. So, in a nutshell, in a very short version, this is my story.
This is a
The past
fascinating
35,
story,
34 years
Ambassador.
or so.
Very fascinating story. Thank you for sharing. Let's talk about politics. I think many people agree that Afghanistan in crisis in many ways, security issues, you have economic problems, and you have, on top of that, a government cannot be united. What's going on?
Well, the word crisis, I think, to some extent applies to Afghanistan at different phases. Again, if you look at the last 40 years, we've gone through crises and came out of them and entered new sets of crises, sometimes more severe, sometimes less severe. But in any case, our problems are not resolved. After 9/11, most Afghans or all Afghans thought that the past is behind us, war has ended, there is now a peace dividend probably that will help shape the future of Afghanistan. And to some extent, that has happened. I think that the picture that the media portrays is to some extent correct, but also there's a lot that has happened that is positive and constructive over the last 15 years since NATO, the Americans, and many others, including the international community as a whole, promised to help Afghanistan rebuild the country after having forgotten the country in the 1990s.
So tell us about some of those positive developments you mentioning? Because obviously the mainstream media are not talking about it.
Right. So mainstream media obviously always goes after bad news, as you know, and they go after anything that is doesn't look very good. Good news is not news. I think that the number one issue is that Afghanistan has a constitution, even though it's not a perfect constitution. It has an elected, even though it's not a perfectly elected government. It has a parliament, even though parliament has its issues. There is a series of state building measures that were undertaken, some of which has some basis now and will not change that easily, even though, for example, the Taliban want to change it. But there are a lot of accomplishments and achievements in areas such as education, such as private enterprise, such as 4 to 5 million Afghans who used to be refugees have come back to the country, and more are coming back these days. The fact that we have an army, a standing army, and a police force that did not exist 15 years ago, but existed 40 years ago. And now they are being rebuilt with international assistance. So, I mean, all of these are very positive signs, but at the same time, the one factor that has prevented us from having more stability in a more durable peace is the fact that one particular group, a militant group called the Taliban, have continued to wage war against the country and its people. And they are preventing progress from taking place and taking hold. And they are creating this environment that is insecure and an environment that is fragile.
Okay, don't you think not having a unity government that contributes to having a group like Taliban taking advantage of that? So let's go back to the first question: why there's no unity government?
Yes. The first question we did not finish. There's a unity government, it's called the National Unity Government, which came about as a result of elections back in 2014, where 7 to 8 million Afghans went and voted under very difficult conditions when the Taliban were firing at them. And this is how the process works. It works through a constitutional process which calls for elections, it calls for free campaigning, it calls for free media, it calls for participation by all Afghans under the rule of law. This one group has decided not to be part of this. They want to impose their own rule, their own version and interpretation of what they call Sharia, and they want to take Afghanistan back many centuries. The way they did, and the people of Afghanistan have very good experience, very bad experience, but very good memory of this bad phase when the Taliban ruled over 80% of the country between 1996 and 2001. And the overwhelming majority of Afghans do not want to go back. But at the same time, Afghans want a system that works for them. They want a government that is responsible. They want a government that is not corrupt. They want justice, which is very important, and a justice system that works and is not corrupt. They also want progress, which is not, a model that has been imported from any other country. That is an Afghan model. So these are the issues that I think the Taliban have also capitalized on. And the government has been unable in some ways to deliver on some of these issues. The government of Mr. Karzai, who ruled for about 13 years or so, ended up being somewhat inefficient and corrupt. This government came about as far as elections are concerned. Now, the Taliban do not want to be part of this government. There have been many attempts to talk to them, to sit down with them, to negotiate with them, to tell them that it's okay as Afghans, they can come also be part of the system. But so far, they have not accepted. Maybe some of them feel that it's time to change, and we hope so, but others are still very much part of a very different mindset and a different strategic game that is going on in our region.
So Taliban, obviously, they have supporters in Afghanistan. What do you think? How many? What's the percentage of supporters? Obviously, Taliban cannot exist in Afghanistan unless it has those, supporters to support them.
I don't think anybody knows whether they have supporters and what supporter means. I mean, if supporter means that
Well,
you
supporters,
send,
they want
send your
Sharia.
son, you
Forgive me.
send your son
Forgive
to.
me. They want Sharia law, right? Part of Afghan constitution. They want this and that. They want their own way.
No, but there's a very big difference
no.
between wanting Sharia law and fighting and killing your own people, and destroying the schools and destroying clinics,
But then no.
and asking your women to stay home. There's a very big difference.
What I'm saying is there must be support.
Overwhelmingly, this notion of the Taliban
Ambassador, you
this
say
or that is a very flawed notion. The Taliban are a militia. If you look at the history, if you go and read the books that have been written about the Taliban, it's a religious militia.
It is, but they have community. It's not. They are not without families and community.
Let me finish my answer to your question. It was at the very beginning. It came about because it said we are going to fight warlordism. They became warlords themselves, and they have broken every rule, Afghan rule and Islamic rule, ever since they were created. Now, you're asking me who is supporting them. Nobody knows who is supporting them, but they have a certain level of support in parts of Afghanistan that is very dissatisfied for whatever reason. They have some support with people who want that kind of Sharia to be implemented, but that is maybe 5% of the country. This is why we're saying if your program is a good one, if your ideas are acceptable to the majority of the Afghan people, why are you afraid to come and take part in elections and present your program to the Afghan people? And if the Afghan people vote for you and the majority votes for you, fine. You come and create a Taliban-style government. And then also there's another problem. They're affiliated and they're allied with international terrorist groups. They work hand in hand with Al Qaeda. They work sometimes hand in hand with groups that are on the international list of terrorist organizations in the United Nations or many other countries. Unless and until they break those ties with international organizations, terrorist organizations, the Afghan people are not going to accept them. The international community is not going to accept them. So it's not just a question of how many people support them, because that can change from day to day. For example, if in a part of Afghanistan, a warlord or a commander or a government official is very corrupt and people are very unhappy or justice is not being rendered, it's possible that today some people will go and support the Taliban. But tomorrow, if the government is doing good work and the government officials are not harassing people and are not taking money, then the people will come back and say, okay, we support the government, will not support this militant group.
Well,
there are a lot of issues.
You mentioned corruption, so let's talk about. Do you agree the government is corrupted then in Afghanistan?
The government has deep corruption issues.
What step has been taken to reduce or deal with corruption in Afghanistan?
A lot of laws have been passed, a lot of programs and initiatives have been taken in order to fight corruption. A lot of pledges and promises have been made to fight corruption. But unfortunately, for the past 15 years, as I said earlier, the leadership of the country tolerated and at times even encouraged people to engage in corrupt behavior and corrupt practices. From contracting to appointments to paying for every service that government offers, from small services to large services, and sort of what they call white collar, sophisticated corruption that you usually don't see, but is there and exists at very high levels. and can be hidden many times, usually. So that subculture has unfortunately is starting to take hold. And unless this government and future governments realize that this is going to hurt and damage the country for a long time to come, and that this country is not going to be able to stand on its feet and be able to take care of itself unless they fight corruption at all levels, starting at the very top, then we are in for a very long time of trouble and problems, and I hope that they realize that and do what is necessary.
And also, talking about corruptions, you have to talk about all the foreign aid poured in Afghanistan in the last decade or so. Recently, in Europe, Afghanistan asked for more money. I want to know, there's two questions in there. Don't you think corruptions need to be dealt with before asking for more money? Because as we know, that the money was sent to Afghanistan, the foreign aid money or and light money, that all the aid, it was corrupted. It didn't use for the purpose it was sent. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to generalize. Part of the money was managed and is being managed by very serious organizations and processes that make sure that the money is spent properly. But there's part of the money that is mostly outside government control that creates corruption in the country. Not every dollar from foreign aid ends up, wasted or corrupted. Um, what needs to be done is that the country like Afghanistan that needs investment in many ways to help build these institutions. So we talked about the army and the police, for example, as one institution, or the justice system. That needs money. That's coming from this foreign aid. So how can you have a police structure or an army structure or a justice structure to fight corruption in order to do that? So you have to have the money to build them and to sustain them and make sure that eventually they become sustainable.
Correct. So, I understand that part, but what I meant is the money was sent, was not spent for that purpose. Now, how is it guaranteed?
This is a generalization. As I said, and I tried to explain, is that some of the money has been spent, some of the money has ended up being wasted, some of the money was mismanaged, and some of the money was basically a victim of corruption. It's not just all of it was good or all of it was bad. But a country that has been destroyed has to be rebuilt.
Correct. Has it been rebuilt at all?
Like any other country, Iraq is another example. And countries that are post-conflict or still in conflict have to be governed and have to be able to provide jobs for their people, have to be able to create an economy, have to be able to rebuild their institutions. In order for that to happen, you need the money. But at the same time, you need a system that can manage the money properly and be accountable for all the expenditures. That's what we have to do. So from now on,
what steps taken in Afghanistan to do
sorry?
that? In Afghanistan, what steps has been taken to do that? To have a system of follow up and.
I think I answered that earlier. We have built all types of different monitoring agencies, international monitoring agencies. The World Bank is involved, the United Nations is involved, the IMF is involved, parts of the Afghan government are involved, the different countries' aid agencies like USAID and others are involved in making sure that the money that comes in is spent where it's supposed to and is accounted for. So when you have monitoring and controlling agencies or processes, you have better results. And that's what we are trying to do, making sure that there is little waste as possible, or no waste hopefully, and little corruption as possible.
Let's move to Mujahideen and Taliban. Tell us the difference between these two. There's some
the Mujahideen were
some people, when you research on Afghanistan, they say, Taliban started as Mujahideen, right? After Soviet invasion
I think
and
there's
all of
some
that.
level of misunderstanding or misconception. Mujahideen were the people of Afghanistan who joined the struggle against the Soviet occupation from 1978, 79 until 1992 when the communist government fell. Those were the people who belonged either to some factions or to some organization inside the country, or in individuals in villages in towns where people did whatever they could to resist foreign occupation. They all called themselves Mujahideen, and people were very proud of the fact that this country, had its own citizens. So, and these were not some specific group of people. These were the citizens of the country who decided to resist occupation. After 1992, these Mujahideen groups, most of them who were factions, who had become political military factions, came to take power inside the country. And they had internal problems which led to more conflict, mostly in the cities. During the Soviet times, most of rural Afghanistan was destroyed. More than 4 or 5 million people were pushed out. They had to flee and escape the country. More than 1 million Afghans died in the war. After 1992, the fighting was mostly concentrated in Kabul and some cities. But that led to the emergence in 1994, 95 of a new group called the Taliban. The Taliban, some of them were former Mujahideen, but most of them who were young, 18, 19, 20 years old, were not Mujahideen. They belonged to mostly the madrasas that had been set up for refugees in Pakistan. So they came from the madrasas as students of religion, and they joined the Taliban.
And
But
Taliban
all of
then,
this, sorry?
just a second, Taliban then was started being supported by the United States, right? That's
I
the
wouldn't
thing.
say
People,
supported. I would not say supported
well,
by the
it's
United
like
States.
similar situation what we have in Syria. They were rebels against the power, and then they had some kind of support.
Well, we can have some analogies in some cases. I tend not to always compare things because the situation is different. But the Taliban have a lot of influence, and they are helped and supported and have been since 1994, 95 by several um, governments, and especially intelligence services, mainly Pakistan, who till today is very much involved in supporting the Taliban, and everybody admits it these days. For Pakistan, they consider this as part of their defense strategy. But for Afghanistan, we consider this as interference, and we consider this as proxy warfare, and we consider this as trying to impose by force an entity that that does not represent Afghan aspirations, and if it does, it needs to come and join everybody else and fight for power through legitimate means, not through violence. So there is a lot of geopolitics and geostrategy involved. There's a lot that is going on behind the curtain, basically. Initially, they were also supported by the Saudis and some other Gulf countries, but then they lost all of that support, most of it. And today, their bases and their safe havens are all outside Afghanistan. They have presence in Afghanistan in different parts. They control some districts. They control most of the drug business. This is another source of money for them. They control the arms smuggling business. And there's a network now. So the Taliban have become a military, business, political network. And so we hope that they realize that what they're doing is not to the benefit of Afghanistan or Islam. And so that some of them will hopefully join peace talks and try to become normal citizens again.
Yes, Ambassador Omar Samad, define democracy for us.
Well, I mean, democracy, again, in my opinion, has two levels of definition. One level is what makes democracy um, a system of governance in a political sense. Um, there are some fundamental uh, sort of issues that have to be part of a democracy to then build upon that democracy. And then when you build upon that democracy, you use the cultural, historic framework of a country, of a region, in order to build what is best, uh, but using the same foundation, the same principles that are shared by humanity across the board. Some of those have to do with certain freedoms, the freedom to express yourself, the freedom of movement, the freedom of, in some cases, religion, in some countries where you have more than one religion, and respect for other people, the freedom and the respect that has to be, the rights that have to be enshrined in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of human laws, like the Declaration of Human Rights. All of these have found, in my opinion, formed the basis for a democratic society. But then it changes from one part of the world to the other. It has to take the flavor of that country, its history, its people, its society, its culture. And that's where it becomes complicated, because you have people who say, well, you know what, the British system is good, I'm going to try to implement that, or the American system, or maybe the version that we see in some less democratic countries, but they have the name democratic, but it's not democratic. So I think humanity is still trying to make sense of this. And I don't see democracy as black and white, and I don't see democracy as Muslim or Hindu or Christian, and I don't see democracy as race or nationality. I see it as very much a human political system. Now, it has a lot of flaws, it has issues, it has problems, we see it all the time. It's not perfect. But if you compare it to every other political system that human beings have created and used over centuries, it seems to be the one that works best and has the better results. Now, if somebody comes up with something better, why not? Maybe one day we can talk about something different.
Absolutely. Ambassador Omar Samad, my last question. Your favorite food and tea or coffee? We have to end it somehow differently, because it's heavy topic.
I'm going to use my diplomatic experience to tell you that I favor both tea and coffee, but it depends on the time of day. So I'm a coffee person in the morning and a tea person in the afternoon. And no coffee, no tea at nighttime.
Oh, okay.
And as far as food is concerned, I have a very diverse palate, which means that I like to try food from any part of the world, as long as it's safe and healthy and it doesn't cause any issues, whether it's a belief issue or whether it's a health issue.
Very diplomatic
but
answer.
I have very diverse appetite, and I like food from many countries. At the end of the day, I have to say that I cannot go without Afghan food at least once a week. Okay. Maybe it's in my genes.
So that's your favorite.
It's something that my system demands, but I think most Afghans feel that way. They have to have Afghan food at least once or twice a week when they are overseas. At home in Afghanistan, they eat it every day.
Afghan Ambassador Omar Samad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for the questions.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure having you. Thank you for watching. Please follow Ambassador Omar Samad on Twitter at Omar Samad, and I'll see you next time.